In 2002, Subaru made a decision that may have changed American tuning culture forever. They brought us the first 2002 Bug-Eye WRX. Now, standing next to me are not Bug-Eye WRXs. On the left, we have the Hawkeye, which is a 2007, or the GD chassis. And then to my right, we have the A chassis, a 2016.
Unfortunately, I realized long after I recorded everything that the audio was a bit staticky in some places, so here's an unnatural voiceover for ya. If it weren't for Subaru bringing the WRX, we may not have gotten the Mitsubishi Evo, the Civic Type R, the Focus RS, or even the GR Corolla. So we may actually have Subaru to thank for the amazing, affordable tuner cars that we have today. Now, for those looking for the holy grail, both of these generations had a high-performance STI version with a more powerful engine, stiffer suspension, and strengthened chassis,
which Subaru promptly just canceled for the newest VB generation. While the acronym for Subaru Tecnica International seldom aids in brand recognition among common folk, for the enthusiast, it really is the pinnacle of Subaru.
Now, the question I want to answer today is 10 years newer 10 years better? Although both of these cars share the WRX nameplate, they have two different engines, two different transmissions, and two different body styles. To your right, we have the 07 GD chassis with the EJ25 turbocharged engine, 5-speed manual transmission, and the very practical wagon configuration. To your left, we have the 2016 VA chassis with the FA20 turbocharged engine, 6-speed manual transmission, and sedan only. Both come standard with Subaru's tried-and-true symmetrical all-wheel drive system, which enables excellent traction in snow, rain, gravel, and slippery conditions in general. Alright, unfortunately some audio points are completely unredeemable, so I'm going to be chiming in with these random voiceovers that do not align with what the video is doing at all. Interestingly enough, this generation WRX went through 3 different phases. It started with the Bug-Eye, then the Blob-Eye, and then the Hawkeye here. Some assert that the Hawkeye is the least attractive as it has a bit of a pig-nosed grille, but I personally love the massive hood scoop on the 06 and the 07, which really reminds me when I'm behind the wheel that I'm much better than all the plebeians driving their non-turbo Subarus. Unfortunately, in terms of styling, I think the rear of the WRX wagon is definitely its worst asset. I actually had a friend from school come around the back into the front, and he chuckled and said, "Wow, the front looks so much better than the back," and honestly I have to agree with him there.
One of my favorite parts about the WRX wagon is just how practical it is. Being a college student, being able to easily fit all of my stuff in the hatch and just to be able to drive to and from school is really handy. Now, opening it up, with all the seats in place, you're looking at around 27.9 cubic feet, and then with all seats folded down, or the back seats folded down, you're looking at around 61.6. It includes this nice little tonneau cover right here, if you want to just slide that back, and it really is just a cavernous amount of space. Now, taking a look under the load floor, if I peel this rubber mat back a bit, and if I can actually find the release, you actually do have a spot to put the rear tonneau cover, which is very helpful, as well as your various tools on the side. And then if I lift this up, we do find a compact spare tire, which is very handy. With a wheelbase of just under 100 inches, as well as an overall length of 175.8 inches, this car is about half a foot shorter than the current WRX, and it's definitely noticeable out on the road. The car definitely feels small and maneuverable and light, but you do sacrifice a bit of interior room as a result of that. And in terms of overall ground clearance, the wagon has 6.1 inches, which is definitely a bit tall compared to a lot of more performance-oriented cars, but for those living in the snow belt,
it definitely helps you get through the snow. In terms of styling, I think the 2016 WRX is the best generation WRX in terms of looks. Definitely better than the new VB chassis with all of its ugly black plastic cladding, and better than any generation that came before, in my opinion. I just love how aggressive and muscular it looks. It has this nice blocky design, and the way the fenders kind of just bulge out gives it a very aggressive stance. And if you go for the limited trim with LED headlights, you also get better looking headlights and better performing headlights as well.
16 WRX, you're looking at a wheelbase of just under 105 inches and an overall length of 180.9 inches. So it's definitely noticeable that you get a lot more legroom in the new WRX as opposed to the first generation. In terms of ground clearance, you're looking at around 4.9 inches, which definitely means that you're going to have to be a bit more careful about curbs and deep snow as opposed to the 2007 WRX. But as a result, you get a lower center of gravity
and a bit more of an aggressive stance.
Opening up the trunk of this car, this is where the difference between the sedan and the wagon is really noticeable, as you only get about 12 cubic feet of space, which is fine, and you can fold the rear seats down, which is very practical. If, for instance, you want to get new tires or wheels put on the car, you can fit pretty much all of them in here, but it's definitely not as practical and as easy as having a wagon. Lifting up the load floor, you do get an area for tools, just like the wagon, and you do get a compact spare tire, which is a feature that is missing in a lot of modern cars. Perhaps the biggest difference between these two cars is the engine. To the left of me in the 07 WRX, we have Subaru's tried and true, if has a bit of a bad reputation, the EJ25 engine. From the factory, it puts out about 224 horsepower and 226 pound-feet of torque from a 2.5 liter turbocharged flat 4. To the right of me, however, Subaru introduced a brand new engine family for this generation of WRX. Gone is the EJ25 with its signature Subaru rumble, and in its place is the 2-liter
direct injected turbocharged flat 4 engine, and from the factory it puts out about 268 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque.
There's a bit of a caveat here, and that is that both of these cars are lightly modified, per se. The WRX to the right of me has Cobb's intake, a Crawford air oil separator, as well as a Grimspeed catted J-pipe and a Pro Tune by Junior Tuned at 6-star service and performance fabrication. Now on their Mustang dyno, this car put down around 240 horsepower and the same amount of torque, which they said accounts for, in reality, about 260 wheel horsepower and 260 wheel pound-feet of torque, and adjusting for drivetrain loss, that's around 300 of each, but that number is not finalized, and being a turbocharged car, that depends on a lot of conditions such as altitude and temperature. Now peak boost on this car is about 22.5 psi, while peak boost on this car is about 13.5 psi. Now, talking about this car, right now it is running Cobb's Stage 1 Plus electronic boost controller off-the-shelf map, as it has Cobb's big SF intake, post-MAF hose, a Cobb catback exhaust, and IAG air oil separator, the Street Series, and it also has Cobb's 3-port boost controller. I do plan on getting this car dyno tuned this summer after I get a downpipe on it, as the current downpipe has an exhaust leak, so I'll definitely be posting more videos about that.
Alright, hopping inside the WRX, for those of you curious, this is what the key looks like. If I can actually get it to focus. The fob itself is separated from the key. It's simple, clean design. Unlock it. Typical Subaru sound, which I quite like. Opening up the door and shutting it. Sounds relatively tinny, but that is due to the fact that the windows are frameless design. And stepping inside, you do have an interesting driving position. You do sink down. You feel like you sink down a little bit lower than the new WRXs, but at the same time, it is definitely a bit of a higher driving position than a lot of sports cars, and it kind of reminds you that this really is just a performance version of a typical compact Subaru. Now, because it has an actual key and it is manual transmission, you can see nice aluminum pedals down there. Put your foot on the clutch. It starts right up. The seatbelt chime is definitely not my favorite thing in the world, as it can be rather annoying sometimes. But you can see that we have a lovely tachometer that is nice and central, so it's easy to see as you're going through the gears. Then you'll have your fuel information as well as engine temperature on the left, temperature gauge for outside temp on the left, and then on the right you have your trip computer. And you can see that this car is just under 120,000 miles, and the 2016 WRX is also pretty high mileage, just over 100,000 miles. So I really wanted this to be a bit more of a fair comparison. But panning out from there, we have this really nice steering wheel. I believe the earlier model years of this generation got a Momo steering wheel, but it's nice. It's relatively thin, small diameter, a bit of a notches for a 10-2 grip, and one of the best 9-3 grips I've ever felt. There are no buttons on the wheel itself, which is a stark difference from the 2016 WRX, but it is very nice, and it's just a wonderful input. You have a stalk on the bottom right for your cruise control, and then on the left you have your headlight controls, and then on the right you have your wiper controls. Now panning on over to the dashboard itself, it is an entirely hard touch
plastic design, which is fine. Definitely feels a bit chintzy and feels a bit like it just came out of a Walmart discount bin. And then we do have a clock up here in the center, as well as passenger airbag information. Then going down to the center stack, we have air vents, hazard switches, and then this car does have the 6 CD changer, which is pretty nice if you're into CDs. And this car also, I did upgrade the speakers, and so it does have tweeters up on the top next to the door handle, but for this specific car, I put in JBL speakers for the lower. I believe they are two-way component speakers, so an integrated tweeter and woofer definitely makes it sound a little bit better because the stock stereo is definitely leaves something to be desired. Then opening up the glove box, it is not damped and it is not lined with felt, but it is a decent size, able to fit owner's manual and a few other goodies in there. And then down here we have our single zone automatic climate controls, although there are no digital readouts here, so it's nice and simple. Definitely feels a bit plasticky, although there are nice indentations for different temperatures. And then below that we have a little cubby, and here we have a cigarette lighter style outlet as well as an aux jack. Then moving back from there, here is my 5-speed manual transmission shifter. So this does have a Cartboy short throw shifter as well as a Cobb weighted shift knob. And the throws with this are pretty short, but even on the stock shifter, it just feels nice and notchy and mechanical. And you can actually even hear a bit of gear whine in this car, which just adds to the visceral feeling. And then moving back from there, this is where your heated seat controls would be if you got the Limited. You have your manual handbrake, which is a lovely feature to have in this modern day of electronic parking brakes. 2 moderately sized cup holders. And then behind that, we have a 2-tier style armrest. I believe this is a dealer accessory. So up top, you have a more shallow armrest, and then pulling this up, you get even more storage down below. But something to note, if you get the short throw shifter and this armrest, as you can see, I kind of have to cock my elbow a little bit. Otherwise, I will just absolutely blast my elbow into the armrest when I shift into 2nd and 4th gear. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, looking at these seats themselves, they are integrated bucket seats, and the headrests are fixed, which is not my preference, as I personally find that they don't give you the best position in terms of comfort or safety. But the seats are moderately bolstered, which is good if you're of a thinner frame like me, keeps you held in place. But if you are a larger individual, that may be an issue for you. Both the driver and front passenger seat are manual adjustment with no lumbar support. Then moving on over to the door panels, we have hard touch plastics up top, this nice cloth insert, speaker down below, and then a small storage cubby on the bottom. To the left of the steering wheel, this is where I've mounted my Cobb access port, and then this button right here turns on and off the fog lights, and then I actually popped out this button blank to run the wire, so that's not there from the factory. And then to the left, you have your window switches and mirror controls. All right, stepping into the back, this is where the short wheelbase and short length of this car is definitely noticeable. Kind of have to duck in a little bit, and here you can see those frameless doors again, or frameless windows. So sitting behind myself, I had the seat adjusted for me at about 5'11" or so. As you can see, I still have a couple inches of legroom left, although my thighs are definitely a bit far off the ground, but for shorter trips, it should be fine. And then in terms of headroom, if I sit all the way back, I still have a couple inches of headroom left. But as you might be able to see, the ceiling kind of caves in a little bit. And so that means that if I'm leaning over to the left, then my head does touch the ceiling. And then looking down towards the center, you have cup holders here, which are a bit flimsy, but they get the job done. And then a large center tunnel for the drive shaft. And then only the passenger side seat will give you a map pocket, and the doors themselves do not really have any storage other than that little cubby right there. Now moving on over to the center, this is where the car's narrow width is definitely noticeable, as 3 people sitting back here will definitely be tight. And then if I scooch all the way over to the right, the seat was all the way back in its tracks, and I still have a couple inches of legroom left. So as long as you're below about 6 feet tall or so, you should be fine back here. But fitting 5 people total in this car will definitely be a bit of a squeeze. This is what Subaru's modern key fob looks like on models with the keyless access and push button start. So because of that, to lock the doors, just put your finger right here on this indentation. Then to unlock it, just put your fingers behind the door. Opens right up. Stepping inside, definitely a lower step in height than the 07, but still not too bad to get in and out of. Shutting the door. Sounds definitely more solid than the 07. Now, because this is manual transmission and push button start the car, put your foot on the clutch with these nice aluminum pedals, and then fires right up. Now, I definitely think this has a much nicer seatbelt chime than the 07. Doesn't get on your nerves quite as much. Now, this car does have a Grimspeed catted J-pipe with the stock catback exhaust. So because of that, and you might be able to hear it right now, there are definitely buzzes and rattles in this car, which is just something that you're going to want to note if you plan on modifying it. Now, to the left, you have a nice analog tachometer and a nice analog speedometer on the right. In the center, you have your trip computer, which is controlled by these buttons on the steering wheel. You can toggle between trip time, nothing, info, and then a digital speedometer, which is nice to have. And speaking of the steering wheel, it is a nice, thickly wrapped, leather-wrapped wheel with a flat bottom and then pretty chunky 10 and 2 notches and then a nice 9 and 3 grip. Now, my biggest complaint about this steering wheel is that there are just so many buttons on it, cruise control on the right and then infotainment on the left, and in my opinion, it's just a bit overkill. It's definitely something I prefer about the 07 is that there are actually no buttons on the steering wheel in that car, which is very, very nice and just simple. Now, moving on over to the right, up here you have another multi-function instrument display, which is controlled by this toggle right here. You can go to all-wheel drive traction information, fuel economy info, clock, settings, boost pressure, and then just a nice multi-function gauge. Then you do have single zone automatic climate control in this car. I believe if you got the STI, then you would get dual zone, and that information is shown right up here. This car is before the refresh, which gave you Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and I do not like this infotainment at all, especially on startup. It can be very slow to respond. It is nice that it gives you built-in map display, however. Although this feature is becoming rather obsolete these days with smartphone connectivity, but it's just nice to have if you don't have cell reception. You can get built-in apps such as Pandora or AHA, but overall, I definitely would recommend going for the 2018 and up, which gives you a nicer infotainment system. And you do actually have a CD player, which my dad particularly enjoys with his old Grateful Dead CDs, and then micro SD card right here for the navigation system. In terms of the overall dash design, it is an injection molded soft touch plastic, which definitely feels nicer than the 07, but definitely nothing to write home about. And you have a faux carbon fiber strip, and then you have a glove box, which is damped, but it's not lined with felt, and it is a decent size, able to fit the owner's manual and a few miscellaneous items. And moving on over to the doors, it's a combination of soft touch and hard touch plastics with a bit of nice red stitching for this leather portion on the armrest. This model does have the Harman Kardon sound system, which sounds fairly decent, although in this model it is extremely bass heavy. Just the way they have the subwoofer tuned, it is overpowering to the point where you have to turn the bass down if you want to even attempt to get clean audio. And then you also have another storage bin as well as a bottle holder right there. Panning down from the infotainment system, we have a little bit of a storage cubby as well as a 12-volt power input. Then here is the 6-speed manual shifter, which reverses all the way to the right and then back, and it does use a collar to put it in reverse. And if I do that, you do get a nice decently sized backup camera, although the resolution is not great and there is no trajectory, but it's just a nice feature to have. And then we also have what we're using as a coin tray right here, although if you got the STI, this would be where the center differential controller would be. You also have a nice manual handbrake, which is so nice in the modern day and age of cars just having electronic parking brakes. 2 relatively decent sized cup holders, heated seat controls, which are physical, which is nice because that means they stay on even after you shut the car off. Leather-wrapped armrest, although which it is pretty low, so it's not really usable as an armrest, but as you can see, the seat bolstering is thick enough that I'm able to just kind of rest my arm on the seat. Open that up. Moderately sized storage compartment with 2 USB inputs that connect to the infotainment system and an auxiliary input right there. Seats themselves have adjustable headrests, unlike the 07, that do ratchet into place, which is nice, with more of that attractive red stitching. Now, these seats are perforated, but they are heated, but not ventilated, and they are relatively aggressively bolstered, which is something to keep in mind. Looking up here, we have an auto-dimming rear view mirror with a compass, although this model does not have any home link. And then here we have controls for the power moonroof, which you can see right here. It's a relatively standard size, but it definitely brings in some light into this car. Stepping into the back seat, you're looking at about 78.7 inches of combined legroom, which is definitely a noticeable improvement over the 07. As you can see, just sitting here behind myself, I have the seat adjusted for me at about 5'11", and I have quite a few inches of legroom left. It's definitely a lot more comfortable back here. We have 2 mat pockets on both seats, which is another bonus over the 07. Then what appear to be the exact same cup holders. They're rather flimsy, but they get the job done. And then in this model, we don't have any fold down armrest, which definitely is surprising. I believe the 2018s and up actually did give you an armrest there. And then there's another driveline hump for the all-wheel drive system. Now scooching on over to the right side, with the seat all the way back in its tracks, I still have about 1.5 inches of legroom left. So this car is definitely fine. It's still definitely a compact car, and you will notice that. But all right, driving the 2007 WRX wagon. So one thing that I will note is that this car has a mild exhaust leak on the catalytic converter. So I'm not sure how that will affect performance or sound, but just something to keep in mind. Now, I will also notice this car does have the Cobb intake, which definitely just adds a lot of drama in terms of being able to hear the turbo spool up and just that air moving through. It's a good sound. In terms of just first impressions, really, if you're getting into this car, ride comfort is pretty good. It has a relatively compliant suspension, although that does mean that there is a bit of tip and dive and a bit of body roll. But if you like that drama, then it's completely fine. Now the clutch does, the pickup is about the middle of its travel, which can take a bit of getting used to, but it's not egregiously heavy or anything. Honestly, it's pretty good to daily drive. Now, another thing I absolutely love about this car is the shifter. It is a rod actuated shifter, so no cables. So whenever you shift, you feel a mechanical connection. It's fairly notchy, and it is just an absolute joy to shift. In terms of rev matching, it's pretty easy to rev match with just a quick blip of the throttle. And just in terms of just what you're looking for in terms of a daily driver, it is not that punishing. Now, living in Pittsburgh where there's a lot of hills, if you are not used to driving a manual transmission, the fact that it rolls back on hills may startle you a little bit. I've gotten used to it, and I've gotten to a point where I'm comfortable driving a manual transmission. That is something to keep in mind. Now, this road was recently oil and chipped, and so road noise is a bit more pronounced. Right now I'm only going about 30 miles per hour. You can probably tell that there is a fair bit of road noise. So that is definitely something that you may want to keep in mind. Coming up to some good corners here, so this will be a good moment to kind of test the handling. This car does not have traction or stability control, so it is just me and just the basic inputs. You can hear some stuff sliding around. There's definitely a fair bit of body lean, being a wagon with a higher center of gravity and the lifted suspension. The all-wheel drive system just pulls you out of corners is absolutely addicting. Sorry, that's just my dash cam, so I can film the front view. But being typical Subaru, it wants to push at the start, so you kind of have to brake. Once you hit the apex, you can get on the gas, and the all-wheel drive system just pulls you out of corners beautifully. It has a hydraulic steering rack too, which means that you can actually feel road inputs quite a bit. Now, this car is also running on Michelin Pilot Sport all-season 3+ tires. So they're not summer tires, but they are definitely a grippier all-season tire. And right now it's actually good conditions for them too. It's about 52 degrees outside, even though I did just go through a bit of water right there. Now, the way the turbo spools up in this car is definitely interesting. So with the EJ25 from the factory, you have unequal length headers and a non-twin scroll turbo. And so what that means is that the pulses from the exhaust are not hitting the turbo evenly, which can make response feel a little bit quirky if that's not something that you're exactly used to. And the 2016 WRX has equal length headers and a twin scroll turbo, so even though the engine has a smaller displacement, response just feels a bit better. However, with the EJ25 being a bigger engine, you get more torque down low before the turbo kicks in. And this car has a relatively small turbo as well. All right, now while I'm stopped behind this mail truck and going around them, it's a good time to talk about visibility. There is so much glass in this car, and it is spectacular. Although that definitely will hinder safety, meaning that the A-pillars are not as thick, you can see you have a relatively tall driving position, which gives you a bit of a command, and then looking over that hood scoop is just makes me happy. Now, I have not actually had a chance to really take this car out into the snow yet. Hopefully that will come at some point. But from Subarus I've driven in the past, I definitely know that it is something that it is capable of. And that's kind of what these cars are known for, is their all-weather traction. But even on regular sunny days such as today, just the ability for the car to be able to put the power down and to be able to rotate the car around the corner is just such a pleasant and confidence-inspiring feeling. If you, like myself, are not a professional driver and haven't really driven any real performance cars, this is definitely a car that is approachable and something that you can really learn on. Like I said, this car does have Cobb's off-the-shelf Stage 1 map or tune with the electronic boost controller. So peak boost will be around 13.5 PSI or so. And it definitely feels more responsive and gives you more torque than the stock tune. Now, of course, if you are looking to modify these cars, I highly recommend getting it tuned by a reputable tuner, because these cars have been known to be just a bit temperamental sometimes, so that is definitely something to keep in mind. In terms of daily driving, this tune definitely is very good. Relatively decent fuel economy. I've been averaging, a lot of it has been highway travel, but around 23.5 miles per gallon or so. And a lot of that is highway travel, about 75 miles per hour or so. I'm gonna turn on to this on-ramp here and see if I can do a bit of a wide open throttle acceleration run, which I haven't really done before, but let's go. All right, and here we go. Actually was one of the first wide open throttle pulls I've done in this car. Holy crap, this thing's fun. Just with the way you can hear the boost with the turbocharger and the exhaust in the back. Now, I do have a relatively quiet catback on this car. It's just Cobb's stainless steel catback, stock catalytic converter. Whew, that got my heart racing a bit, I'm not gonna lie, because I haven't really done that. But now I'm just cruising at about 70 miles per hour. RPM is at about 2,700, maybe a little bit above. And there's definitely a lot of road and wind noise. That is something that you're going to be, a caveat you're going to have to make driving an older Subaru, especially because the windows are frameless, so that gives you more wind noise, and then there's not a lot of sound deadening underneath, which gives you more road noise. But for me, I don't mind it because it reminds me that I'm actually driving. This car is not the most refined thing in the world, but I'm completely fine with that because it's fun, it's connected, it's analog, and that is something you just don't get in so many modern cars. And so if you are just longing for an older car and a more simplistic feeling, you're gonna love this. Now, there are a couple elephants in the room we must talk about, one being the reliability reputation of Subarus. Now, I managed to find this car, 118,000 miles, bone stock, never modified, owned by a mechanic but driven by his wife. So I do not believe that this car has ever really been abused. And so if you're looking for one of these, definitely try to find the cleanest one you can find that's as close to stock. And then if you are going to modify it, just do it responsibly. Get quality parts from quality sources. Cobb is great. I have the access port so I can actually monitor what's going on in the engine. As well as the IAG makes a great air oil separator for either the 2007 or the 2016, and air oil separators pretty much a must to reduce blow-by and oil getting into the intake tract, because otherwise you have a greater risk for detonation, engine knock. So just treat this car responsibly. The best analogy I ever heard is that this car is like a horse. You need to warm it up well. It can be really fun and fast, but you can't beat on it too bad or bad things are going to happen. But if you treat this car well, it is an absolute blast. And actually, on that acceleration run, I got 13.6 PSI of boost. And man, that got my heart racing. That was so much fun. I'm not gonna lie, there's something about the sound of this car's engine, just the boxer rumble with the unequal length headers, and hearing the turbo, feeling the hydraulic steering where you can feel something through the steering wheel, you can feel vibration through the shifter, you just feel connected driving this car. And that is something you just don't get in so many modern cars. And I really think that this is something we're gonna miss so much down the line. Before this car, I had a 2007 Infiniti G37. It was a fast, reliable, comfortable luxury sports sedan, and I sold it to buy this car at an even trade. And so that just goes to show that, like, it was an irrational decision. In terms of every objective measure, this is a worse car. It doesn't get, the fuel economy is about the same, it's not as comfortable on the inside, it's not as safe, doesn't have as powerful of an engine, but I have so much more fun driving this car than the Infiniti. And I think that just speaks wonders about older, particularly Japanese cars, and why people love them so much. Cars like this, especially with the STI being canceled, they will never happen again. Maybe the closest thing you can get now is something like a GR Corolla, but dealer markups are going to be absolutely insane on that thing. So, if you can find a clean version of one of these cars, I'd say definitely go for it. You will not regret it. Now, let's hop into the 2016 WRX. All right, driving the 2016 WRX. Now, the first things that you're gonna notice are the difference in the inputs. So, instead of a hydraulic steering rack, we have an electronic power steering unit. So that means that you do not get as good of a steering feel, although the weight of the steering is heavier and it is definitely more direct. The clutch feels heavier and the engagement point feels to be more towards the end of the travel rather than the middle. But my biggest gripe has to be the shifter. The stock shifter, it is tall. There's a lot of play when you're in gear, and going between the gears, the best way I can describe it is it feels like you're moving a wooden spoon through day-old oatmeal. But I mean, it's fine. At least we get a manual transmission, but it feels like I'm driving a truck. It does not feel nearly as engaging as the 07 WRX. Now this car, the 07 WRX is running on 215 width tires on 17-inch wheels. This has 245 width tires on 18-inch wheels. So you definitely have a big jump in terms of grip and overall confidence. I'd say there's not too much body roll going back and forth, much less than the 07, although there definitely is still some. But the chassis just feels way more solid and way more rigid, and that's to be expected being on a platform that's about 12 years newer. Because my WRX, I'm going to refer to mine, this is my dad's. Mine is basically the last model year of a generation that came out in 2002. And this is the second model year of a car that came out in 2015. So this is definitely, feels way more solid, way better put together, and it's definitely a bit more confidence inspiring. However, does that necessarily translate to this car being more fun? Thing to remind you of, this car is pro-tuned with an intake and a downpipe or J-pipe or aftermarket catalytic converter. It also has a mild burble tune, which if you just tap the gas you can kind of hear a little bit. But now I'm going to put traction and stability control into sport mode, and we're going to take it through the same set of corners and see how it does. So definitely can get more entry speed in this. Although I can hear stuff sliding around, sorry. Yep, there's some coins. Also, definitely wants to shove or push into the corners a bit more. At least that's what I'm feeling. This is a bit of a heavier car, and while it's still definitely fun to take around the corners, it is not, I don't know, it just doesn't necessarily have the same feel that the 07 did. Or maybe that's just the way that the torque comes on and the way I'm driving it. I mean, it still pulls you out of corners excellently. The all-wheel drive traction is spectacular, because both of these cars are sending 50% of the torque to the front and 50% to the rear. too. Although this car's intake sounds a bit more like Darth Vader breathing as opposed to the typical psh that you get in the 07. But overall, this car feels way more rigid and, to be completely honest, confidence-inspiring than the 07. Alright, other things to mention, there definitely is a fair, just like the other one, there's a fair bit of road noise. Subarus have never really been known for having the most refined vehicles on the planet, and that just seems to be typical, and that's a compromise you may need to be willing to take. Overall, just in terms of chassis dynamics, it feels better than the 07, but the inputs make this car feel not quite as well connected as the 07. You have a cable-actuated shifter that is not the most inspiring thing in the world, and granted, I do have a short throw shifter in the 07, so that might solve some of the issues here, but you can never replace cables with rods to get that just better connection and more physical, vibraty feel. I'll say though, this car definitely is more comfortable. You have more creature comforts, nicer sound system, heated seats, moonroof. The seats themselves are more comfortable. The headrest is at a good position for me. Visibility is spectacular. Even for modern cars, Subarus by far have the best visibility. This car in the limited trim, it does have blind spot warning and rear cross traffic detection, but you really have to be an idiot to ever even need them with how much glass is around you. Now granted, this car does have 20% window tints, so that makes it feel a little bit darker in here and kind of gives the impression of not having quite as good visibility as it actually does. But it's honestly pretty darn spectacular. And rev matching, I wouldn't say it's quite as easy as the 07 with the slightly bigger engine, but it's still fine. But turbo response is definitely the biggest difference I feel. In the 07, you get low-end torque with a bigger displacement, and then all of the turbo boost kind of comes on all at once. With this being an twin-scroll turbo with equal-length headers, the boost feels more natural as it comes on. There definitely still is some turbo lag, but there's not quite as much drama as the 07. And I don't think the exhaust sounds as good. I love the sound of the older Subarus. I'm gonna do the same acceleration test on the same on-ramp, starting from first gear. So, all right, and here we go. Hopefully I can shift better this time. Yeah, this thing definitely feels faster. Holy crap. Got up to 21.1 PSI of boost there. This car probably was heat soaking a little bit because I had it parked after driving it a little bit. But just from the butt dyno, this car feels a bit faster. The way the boost kicks on, you really get shoved back into your seat. And it's just such a fun feeling being able to, just the acceleration, the drama from the turbo noises, being able to shift your own gears. It is a fun car to drive. Now at 70 miles per hour, because this is a 6-speed and not a 5-speed, I'm sitting at about 2,500 RPM. So fuel economy definitely is going to be a lot better in this car, as long as you're at a reasonable speed and staying out of boost. In 6th gear, I don't recommend it, but you do have enough torque to pass people. But this car, this engine in particular, lugging it excessively is its Achilles heel. You will run into issues if you lug this car excessively, namely with just bent rods. That's probably the biggest one, honestly. In terms of overall engine design, these cars are able to, for horsepower per dollar ratio in terms of modding, these cars are able to handle more. Now, I'm not saying you should just slap on a bunch of random parts, tune to the moon, and expect it not to break. You do need to be careful about reliability in this car as well, and that is something that you definitely need to keep in mind. So once again, Cobb is a good one. I definitely recommend Cobb products, and get a reputable tune. I don't recommend keeping an off-the-shelf map for a long time. We had one on this car for about 1.5 years because we bought it and it was modified and we didn't know it. But then we got a Pro Tune to get that sorted out. We have a Crawford air oil separator on. I definitely recommend the IAG Street Series V3, especially if you live in a colder climate, because that one actually circulates coolant through. So that would just help to prevent any potential freezing with the PCV terms of overall refinement, this car definitely has a firmer suspension, and you can feel that. I mean, it's fine for daily driving, but if you are someone who has back problems or you're just really sensitive to firm suspensions, you may not like this. In terms of the bottom line, would I or would I not choose this, the 2016 WRX over the 2007 WRX? If my money are on the line, and in my case it actually was because I bought the 2007 WRX, I would go for that. I mean, this, if you can give up the creature comforts that this newer car gives you, I definitely have more fun driving my 07 WRX than the 2016, even though it doesn't handle quite as well, even though the chassis isn't as rigid, even though the fuel economy is worse. I feel something more when I drive that car compared to this. Now, if we're talking about the STI, then that's where things might change, because the STI gives you the EJ25 engine. It gives you a rod-actuated shifter. It gives you a hydraulic steering rack. So if between the WRX, my WRX, and the STI, I'd definitely go for the STI because you get the creature comforts along with the more rigid chassis and the fantastic inputs that these cars give you. Overall, buying cars like these is seldom a rational and objective decision. I really love driving, and so I want to be able to feel something when I drive. I want to be able to feel connected to the road. I want to have that man-to-machine connection that just puts a smile on my face when I row through the gears and hear the rev of an engine. And that is something that EVs may end up taking away. And so if you have the money and if you are able to, please go out and buy a car like this, because you will not regret it, and it will put such a big smile on your face. All right, that's all for this one. See you guys next time.